If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine, and maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them, from disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Hello listeners, and welcome to this bonus episode of the Cult Vault podcast. Joining me today are special guests Erika Borman and Daniel Schricker, who you may recognise from episodes 163 and 177 of the Cult Vault podcast. I'm your speaker Casey, and there have been significant updates on the case surrounding KwaSizabantu, and with Erika and Daniel presenting at this year's annual International Cultic Studies Association conference, we thought it would be a good idea to bring you all up to speed. Towards the end of this episode, Erika has provided a short audio file with an update on the situation since we recorded this episode, and as things move along, we will be sure to keep you informed. If you haven't, I do recommend going to pick up a copy of Erika's book, Mission of Malice, My Exodus from KwaSizabantu, or listen back to our episodes, or check out Daniel's essays on KwaSizabantu at ksbalert.com. Or go and do a quick research on KwaSizabantu before heading into this episode so that you have some context around the conversations that take place. But for now, here are friends of the Cult Vault podcast, Erika Borman and Daniel Schricker. So hello, Erika and Dan, and welcome back to the show. I'm so excited to sit down and catch up with both of you at the same time. Would you please like to introduce yourselves to the listeners?
Yes, hello, Casey and Daniel. What a delight to be back with you. It's been like a long time since we last chatted. I'm Erika Borman. I grew up in an evangelical cult called KwaSizabantu in South Africa, and I ran away at the age of 21. And since 2000, I have been trying to raise awareness of the abuses that occur there. In 2020, I contacted News 24, which is a big organization, South Africa's biggest online news organization, and they launched a 7-month investigation into the place, and that resulted in an expose called Exodus. And as a result of Exodus, I got a book deal to write my memoir, and my memoir, Mission of Malice, My Exodus from KwaSizabantu, was published in August 2021. And last year, it won the inaugural Diane Cassoni Award from InfoSect. So I live in Cape Town with my 2 cats. And if you were able to see us, you would see my ginger boy, Troy, who's currently sitting on my lap. And that's me.
Thank you so much, Erika. And hi, Daniel. Welcome back to the show. Would you like to introduce yourselves or reintroduce yourselves to the listeners?
Sure. Thank you for having us back again. I was kind of like Erika. I was trying to remember when I was actually on your show, because it's like, I think it feels like it's been longer than it actually has, but I couldn't remember the exact date. Yes, so my name is Daniel Schricker, and I'm from Adelaide in Australia. But I grew up in Germany originally and spent the first 8 years of my life there, and then spent a little bit of time living at KSB in South Africa for 6 months when I was 5 years old. And then not too long after that, a couple of years later, my family moved to Australia. So I've been in South Australia ever since then. And I'm a composer and a music teacher, so I mostly teach trumpet to school kids at the moment. And recently I've gotten a little bit more into the writing side of things as well. And that kind of actually kicked off with Erika's book, really, because I just kind of jotted down some thoughts in the form of a review and sent that to her. And yeah, that sort of led to a number of other writing projects around KSB.
And you have 4 published essays of different themes that you've written about KwaSizabantu that are available online for people to read right now.
That's right. Yeah. So yeah, basically after reading Erika's book and just seeing some of the stories that were coming out in the News 24 articles, it occurred to me that there were some recurring themes that were being expressed, especially by people that had been born into the group and had been raised in it. And one of the kind of pervasive features that always seemed to come up again and again was just how intrinsic and all-encompassing the fear and anxiety was for a child growing up in that context. So the 4 essays that I wrote became focused around that theme and just looking at different aspects of the way the theology and the practices of KwaSizabantu affected children with regards to that fear, and also the psychological implications, not only in childhood, but looking more in the long term. How does this affect people into adulthood as well?
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
We're speaking to each other from 3 different continents, 3 different time zones. We've got the UK, we've got Australia, and we've got South Africa. I think that's awesome. But there was time in history where the 2 of you actually did cross paths during your time at KwaSizabantu. For a brief period, there was a window where you were there at the same time.
So I ran away from KwaSizabantu in January 1993. How old were you then, Daniel?
Depending which time of the year, but I would have turned 3 in October that year.
Yeah. So no, he was 3 years old when I ran away. So no, we were there at like very different times.
I don't mean
So we did-
socially, like to chat. I mean just in the same space, and then you've connected later in life and realized, oh my goodness, we were both there, just experiencing things very differently.
Right. So if I remember correctly, Erika, in your book, you mentioned that you were at the funeral of David Xhaka in '96.
Yes, you're
Yeah,
right.
so
You're
that's
absolutely right.
The one time we would have crossed paths without realizing it. So that was when I was living at KSB for 6 months. And yeah, so this Zulu man who I actually knew a little bit, he was a very friendly, cheerful kind of guy from what I remember. And he loved just like playing with the kids and things like that. So I have very fond memories of him. And it was kind of a big shock when he suddenly died in a car accident. I think he was picking up some visitors from the airport or something like that. And one other just kind of bizarre anecdote surrounding that story was that they had kind of scheduled to show my sisters and I The Burning Hell, which was one of the favorite kind of propaganda films that they always showed to children there. And it was really just because of the suddenness and the shock of this man dying that all of that kind of got forgotten. And then I remember attending the funeral and things like that. So there was sort of a bizarrely positive side effect, if you can say that, in relation to somebody dying, but it meant that I missed out on one of these very traumatic movies that they like to show to children there.
Yeah, that was in 1996, 3 years after I'd left, and that actually marked the very final time I ever set foot at KwaSizabantu. So Daniel, you would have been around 5 or 6 years old then. Yeah,
that's right. So that was my first time at KSB. Was your last time at KSB there?
Yeah.
And we were looking through some family albums the other day, and we've still got a picture of your mother in, I think it was like a party or something that was thrown at Radio Kwasi, which is the radio station on the mission. And so I think my mother had a little bit to do with your mother, but I don't know that they became good friends or anything like that.
And for the listeners, parties are always without alcohol.
I don't know if you, I mean, I don't know if I call that a party.
No.
Unless it's a children's party, of course. I don't want to start condoning alcohol at children's parties. So you both have had very different experiences. You were at KSB at different times. Daniel, you are no longer in South Africa, so there's a pivotal change in your personal experiences. And of course, you would have both had differing experiences based on your gender as well, given what we know about KSB. So, would you be able to give us a brief overview of the Christian mission itself, and then we can talk a little bit about your personal experiences before discussing the main topic today, um, which I'm really looking forward to getting into, because by the time this episode airs, the public will be able to go and read all about the things we're going to discuss.
Right. Yeah, so in terms of an overview of KwaSizabantu, I will start off by just mentioning that there are two interviews that Erika and I have done separately on the Cult Vault, which give a lot more comprehensive detail about this. So by all means, go and have a listen to those if you're interested. But just a quick summary. So KwaSizabantu was a religious movement that originated in South Africa under the direction of a man called Erlo Stegen. And they claimed that they experienced a religious revival of sorts in 1966. And so they believed that God manifested himself in a tangible kind of way, which was accompanied by, according to them, a lot of miracles, exorcisms, and including one of their leaders being raised from the dead, which is still something they like to refer to quite often. And again, according to them, this resulted in large numbers of conversions amongst the Zulu people. And yeah, that was really the birth of the whole movement. And KwaSizabantu was relatively good at marketing in terms of like knowing how to promote themselves through books. And they affiliated themselves with a guy called Kurt Koch, who was kind of fairly well known in the evangelical scene at that point. And that allowed them to gain enough traction to plant churches and hold these conferences in Europe. And eventually there was a church in Australia that formed as well. I believe they even had a church in the US later on at one point. So yeah, that was kind of how the whole thing got going. And in Europe, they were relatively successful at expanding. So that was my initial contact with KSB, was actually the conferences in Europe. And by the time I was attending as a child, there were thousands of people that were coming to these conferences. And that allowed them to plant KwaSizabantu churches basically throughout Europe. I mean, Romania and France and Switzerland and Germany. And yeah, so it really gained a lot of traction there. So yeah, Erika, is there anything else important we should add to the KSB overview?
Well, in terms of South African history, what's interesting is that it was established during the apartheid years when there was racial segregation in South Africa, and KwaSizabantu touted itself as this multiracial nirvana, which is definitely what attracted my father to them in the first place. However, our experiences there, I was white, so I was still very privileged. The Black children and the Black people, for the vast majority, except those in high leadership positions, were treated very badly compared to their white counterparts. So there was great racial disparity. There has always been, I believe, there possibly still is. And just as a benchmark of that, in the more than 50 years that the place has existed, there's never been a single interracial marriage. So, you know, that very, very on the surface, a multiracial society, but in practice, a deeply racist compound.
And the hub in South Africa still exists. It's still in operation right now. And would you say that that is still the main operating point for KwaZizabantu, despite these other places popping up across Europe?
Yeah, so like I said, they initially had a great deal of success actually expanding the work like outside of South Africa. That's all kind of changed a little bit in the last 3 to 4 years, because a lot of the branches that they had outside of South Africa, they've cut ties with the mission officially now. So that includes the Australian Church and most of the European ones. There is I believe there's a Swiss, a German, and a Romanian group that are still affiliated with KwaSizabantu. There may even be a couple more that I'm not aware of, but just off the top of my head, I know that there's some that are still together with KSB. But that's sort of become kind of its own controversy in the sense that there was an investigation that took place into the European sector, specifically the Swiss branch. And because they planted a church and a school there as well. And kind of similar to what's emerged with KwaSizabantu in South Africa, there's been all of these allegations of child abuse and kind of a systemic system of fear that existed in the same way in Switzerland. They, to their credit, they seem to have done a little bit more in the way of trying to address that situation and actually get to the bottom of it. I don't know what the final outcome of that has been, but it seemed like there was a bit more sincerity behind their attempts to actually get to the truth of what happened.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that for more than 2 decades, that former Swiss KwaSizabantu branch, just like KwaSizabantu in South Africa, always dismissed all allegations of abuse as malicious attacks, right? But then, was it last year, I think, they finally had private individuals investigate and speak to former victims. And the Swiss branch has actually acknowledged the injustice committed for years, apologized, and they promised financial aid to the victims so that they can pay for therapies.
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Now, I've spoken to someone else who was a victim but wasn't at the school, and they are being denied those funds. So you would have had to have been at the school in order to get financial aid from these people. Swiss authorities wanted to investigate and prosecute, but the victims who could make that happen didn't want to endure the trauma of going through all that again in a court of law. So as far as I know, there's no prosecutions. Although the authorities really wanted to prosecute, they can't do so without the cooperation of the victims. And I feel very strongly that every victim has the right to own their story and do what they want with it. And if they don't want to prosecute, then that's their right. So as far as I know, on the Swiss side, there are no prosecutions.
And I think it's understandable when we take what Daniel has said about systemic fear, generational systemic fear, that is implemented into this system, this self-sealed system that exists in the Christian mission, specifically in South Africa, that people don't come forward and to publicly to appear in a courtroom in front of their abusers and perpetrators. And that is kind of what leads us to having continuous dialogue between the three of us, because at the moment, as it stands, there aren't too many other people that have decided to share their stories in the way that the two of you have. So it's kind of like not speaking for others, but making sure that you get your personal stories and experiences out there as much as possible to make people aware that it's not just happening now, it's happened before. And the only way we can make those changes is if we recognize that the abuse is continuous and ongoing, which is kind of what this whole conversation today is going to be about. And I find it interesting when we talk about reports of reports and investigations into other branches of KSB, because that kind of ties up nicely with what we're talking about today. But in order to get an understanding of the reports that and investigations that are taking place, I think it would be good to recap some of your personal experiences. So I wondered if you'd both be willing to share with us an overview of your time in KSB. Erica, I didn't know if you'd like to start with that one.
Yeah, so my experience, the 13 years that I was part of that community, my parents joined when I was around 9 years old, and I ran away at the age of 21. And of course, the effects lasted long into my life, but my actual association with that place lasted 13 years. And it can be summed up in one word, and that is terror. They terrorized us by showing us movies like Daniel has mentioned, things like The Burning Hell. There was a movie about communists. It was called The Footman. It's a much longer title, but it's this awful man, Eustace Perkel, this American dude who created these horrific movies that was meant to instill fear. And The Footman was all about the communists. And after premarital sex, the communists were the biggest thing that KwaSizabantu preached about at the time. There was no age restriction. Toddlers and babies had to watch on screen, as a bamboo stake was put through a boy's ear, from his one ear out his other ear. I'll never forget that image. And then they would beat us, the children, in public, especially in the school. And the black children had it much worse than the white children. But what I witnessed was already bad enough. The whole school would be gathered, and whoever had done wrong would be called, and they would be made to lie down on the ground, and one adult male would hold their upper body down, one adult male would hold their lower body down, and the third adult male would rain down blows on this little body, from a great distance, with a plumbing pipe that was often filled with sand to make it heavier. And all this instilled fear in us to obey. But then the other thing, and Daniel can talk a lot more about the doctrine, but they believe that you have to confess your sins to a human being every time you sin. Otherwise, you're not saved. You won't go to heaven. So if I even had a little bit of anger towards my mother and I went to sleep without confessing that sin, I went to sleep believing that in all likelihood I was going to die that night and I would be going straight to hell. And so it was just fear. They also don't allow boys and girls to talk to each other. How marriages work is the man goes to the leader and says he feels God wants him to marry this girl. Funnily enough, it's often the pretty girls who God picks first. And then the girl gets told, and she has to go pray about it. But as a girl, you've been taught that men are superior to you, and that women are temptresses and are there to serve the man. And I, for one, at the age of 19 and 20, got asked 3 times in the course of a year and a half. And I don't know where I got the courage from, but all 3 times I said no. So the first time you're with your husband, the first time you're alone in a room together is the night of your marriage. And you get like a 2-minute sex education talk then from the leader of the mission, separate from your husband, and you're basically told that you have to submit. So this thing that you were told to avoid at all costs suddenly is sanctioned, and not only sanctioned, but mandatory, compulsory. But my experience, of course, I didn't go through that there. I didn't marry. And then families are broken up when someone in the family decides to leave. So I was disowned by my mother, my sister. I wasn't allowed to have any contact with my 3 nieces. And that is true for, I don't think there's a single person in the leadership at KwaSizabantu whose family is intact.
There's so much more to your experiences that we won't get into today, but you can go and visit episode 177 for more information on Erika's experiences. But also, of course, you can pick up a copy of Mission of Malice, the award-winning memoir, which is available today. Fantastically, wonderfully written book with heartbreak and disaster littered throughout. So it's like, I know that sounds like an oxymoron, like a massive juxtaposition, but it is also a story of hope, because it ends with you taking back power for yourself and becoming an independent and empowered woman, which is not something that anybody can ever be in KwaZizabantu. So I think that's amazing. I'll put links to Erika's book in the episode description. So if you want to go and check that out, you definitely should. And that leads us to asking you, Daniel, if you can give us an overview of your experiences as a man in a different generation of KSB, and how your experiences looked.
Yeah, certainly. So as I mentioned, my initial exposure was in the European sector of KwaSizabantu. And at that point, our connection to it was not as deeply entrenched as actually being part of a KSB church. So it was really mostly just in the form of attending the conferences and then spending those 6 months at KSB in South Africa as well. So it wasn't actually until my family moved to Australia when I was 8 that we became part of a KSB church officially. So I was there between the ages of 8 and then left shortly before my 18th birthday. Now, the one advantage of this particular group is that they tended to be a lot milder in certain aspects of the way KSB conducted themselves, partly just because they didn't have the same degree of lack of accountability that I think KwaSizabantu in South Africa has had and sort of gotten away with for a long period of time. So you didn't have the same physical or sexual abuse taking place. But the doctrine was identical, because they idolized KwaSizabantu and the leaders, so a lot of what was happening in our church was essentially just
step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
a pastor who had no theological training, who was just seeking to imitate the preaching that he was hearing from KwaSizabantu. And every year, Friedel Stegen, who is the founder's brother, he would visit Australia and do like a preaching conference across, I think it was usually across 2 weeks, where there would be services like pretty much every single day. So there was always this constant reinforcement of KSB kind of coming once a year and seeing what we're up to. And also many of the members of the church would go and visit KSB in South Africa. I mean, some of them married people from South Africa and people from KSB Europe and things like that. So yeah, a lot of what Erika described in terms of the marriage and the courtship system, that was absolutely the same in Australia. So one of my sisters received a proposal of marriage in the way that Erika just described. And it was actually a very traumatic event for her, even though she declined the proposal. And there was a lot of pressure from the leadership directed towards her, you know, when they realized that she wasn't that keen on marrying this guy. So during that time, when I was part of the Australian group, that was also when I did my second trip to KSB South Africa and spent a month there during their youth conference, their mid-year youth conference. And that was when I was 14 years old. And I just went with a friend from the church who was a little bit older than me. I think he was in his late 20s at the time. And that was kind of, in hindsight, I look at that as kind of providential in the sense that it planted some seeds of doubt in my mind about their doctrine because of discussions I had and just noticing. I was a little bit older, of course, at this point, getting to an age where I'm starting to think a little bit more independently. And particularly, I was starting to really question the confessional system. That was one of the first points that kind of bothered me. And so within a couple of years, really after that, I started questioning things more in relation to the church that I was a part of specifically. And I initially that was kind of focused primarily on the fact that I was unhappy with the mistreatment of some of the members in the church and the fact that the leadership wasn't doing anything about it, despite the fact that there were people bringing it to their attention. In fact, when I tried to bring it to people's attention, I was kind of told that I should have enough sin in my own life to stop me worrying about what anybody else is doing, which now in hindsight, I realize is a very typical kind of trope that high control groups use to stop people actually investigating what's going on. But yeah, so at the age of 17, then I kind of, I spoke to the pastor and also the guy that was unofficially the youth pastor. And eventually I spoke to all of the young adults and the youth. And one of the concerns that I addressed with the pastor was just the fact that I was becoming concerned at the kind of blind allegiance they were giving to KSB, but specifically Friedel Stegen, because he was kind of the main representative to the Australian group. And it kind of makes me laugh now, even though it wasn't funny at the time, but the pastor responded the following Sunday by getting up, and he managed to find a verse in the New Testament, which he just plucked entirely out of context. And it's a verse where Paul talks about imitating him as he imitates Christ. And he proceeded to preach an entire sermon why it was okay for him to just follow Friedel Stegen, because he was part of this great revival. And I mean, initially, I just kind of thought it was a really cowardly way to respond to someone raising concern. So I nearly got up and walked out of the service, but my mum, bless her heart, she stopped me. And but I said to my family then that I'm not going back to the church. Like I'm done with this. And by this point, we'd already been having quite a lot of discussions amongst ourselves as a family. And we'd kind of come onto the same page in terms of just agreeing with the concerns that I had. So we left as a family, which again, now that I've heard so many stories from other people, I realize how much of a rarity that actually is, and just how many families have been split by KSB. I consider myself very fortunate that there was enough of a dialogue taking place within the family. And also, to my mum's credit, she would never have chosen loyalty to any religious group over her children, thankfully. So yeah, we kind of exited the church together at that point. At that stage, I still wasn't that critical of KSB as a whole. I was more focused on the problems within my own church. In fact, so much so that when Friedel came the next time to speak at the church, I actually went back to hear him preach. And he said some not very nice things about us in the service. So that was kind of the last time, because we realized we weren't very welcome there. And yeah, since then, so that's quite a number of years ago, but since then, it's just really been a process of trying to make sense of everything. And to a large extent, I kind of forgot about, well, not forgot about it probably isn't the right phrase, but kind of pushed it to the back of my mind. And it wasn't until I was just randomly browsing on YouTube and I suddenly saw a news story come up about abuse allegations at KwaSizabantu. And yeah, then, as you know, the whole thing with Abuse 24 really kicked off, and that's how I got involved again.
You mentioned, Daniel, that as far as you were aware, the physical and sexual abuses that were taking place in South Africa were not necessarily something that was mirrored in the Australian branch of KwaSizabantu. What was your reactions when you were hearing about and finding out about some of the treatment of children and vulnerable individuals who were based in South Africa experiencing those things? Were you surprised, or were you sort of like, oh, I've been there, I know what the environment's like, so it's not really that surprising?
Honestly, it was a bit of both, in the sense that, and this is kind of difficult to articulate, but all of the ideology that was driving the abuse in South Africa was I would say, present in Australia too, but they didn't necessarily act in accordance with that. And so, that, for example, I remember seeing children, even in my own church in Australia, being treated quite harshly by the parents, not necessarily to the extent that there would be a case that you could make that this is like really abusive, but just things where, you think, is that really necessary? Like it's just a child, like, it's okay to comfort them or something like that. But also, and this I suppose is a feature of a lot of these kinds of cultic groups, is that as a member, you very often, when there's abuse present, you hear these whispers and rumors, even while you're part of the group over the years. And we had as well. In fact, from about 2000, I think that was around the time that KSB Alert was created, which is a website essentially for ex-members to kind of expose KwaSizabantu. And I remember that we were aware of this, but we kind of did what a lot of people do when they kind of experience this cognitive dissonance, and you kind of write it off as being, well, these people are probably just bitter because they had a bad experience. And ironically, the very same things that KSB still is saying about us now, and especially when you haven't experienced the abuse yourself, it's actually very difficult to reconcile that if you feel like you've had positive experiences with these people, because there is such a disparity between the two narratives, right? So I think that was kind of what was going on. So was I shocked by the stories that came out? Yes, I was, by the severity of them. Like when we had always known that there was corporal punishment and that it was very, very strict at KwaSizabantu. Did we know that kids were being beaten within an inch of their life and being held down while they were being beaten? Absolutely not. I mean, my mother just wouldn't have tolerated that even at that point. So certainly the sexual abuse was something that we didn't know about at the time. So yeah, that's been surprising. But having said that, there's also an element where I'm perhaps surprised but not shocked, in the sense that when you look at the ideology and the theology underpinning the entire worldview, it's not surprising that leads to abuse, because that seems like the inevitable conclusion when taken to its logical conclusion. So when you're serving a God that you believe is almost exclusively vindictive and vengeful, guess how you're going to treat your children? You're going to treat them the exact same way you feel God treats you. And that's why I think as much as the abuse is of necessity the focus of the investigations, one of my main concerns, even when I was speaking to the CRL, was actually more of an academic discussion surrounding the theology and the psychology that's driving these people, because ultimately that's what's responsible for the behavior. You can't understand why KwaSizabantu does what they do until you understand their view of God and of people and of the world around them. Yeah.
And that
Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
reminds me of something that you said, Erika, in our first interview, and that was that no one at KSB was allowed to be angry apart from Erlo Sagan, the leader and founder of KwaSizabantu. But his anger wasn't traditional anger, it was a righteous anger.
It was a righteous anger.
There we have that justification for emotion and a certain leadership style, the justification through theology and doctrine, which of course is another staple within the community of KSB that allowed abuses that you personally experienced, Erika, grooming and sexual harassment and assault, under the guise of spiritual leadership and people in positions of power exploiting that theology and being protected by leadership, because if it was to become public knowledge, it would undermine the leadership's ultimate messages of those appointing spiritually inclined people into those positions of power. Again, you can pick up Erika's book to find out more about those particular parts of Erika's story. So vastly different experiences, but here you are together doing this work. I'm gonna go on to assume, Daniel, that you saw the News 24 segment, you found out about Erika, and then the two of you connected and shared parts of your stories with one another, and geographical points in time where you may have overlapped, and all of that good stuff that comes with finding a kindred spirit.
Yeah, I did have a little bit of contact with you, Erika, before your book even came out, because I think that was around the time of the Exodus documentary. And I really just sent Erika a message to say, hey, thanks for speaking up. And I think I shared a little bit about just my family's involvement with the group. And yeah, I think that was, we had a couple of exchanges then until your book was released. But yeah, it was more after the book came out that we kind of collaborated on a few things.
Do you remember receiving those messages, Erika? Because I don't know if that would have been a typical thing to happen.
Well, I got a lot of messages from a lot of people worldwide, but I do remember chatting to Daniel, and also Daniel and I are quite active on Twitter, and I think we started like really interacting on Twitter. And then when Daniel sent me his review of my book, it blew me away, and it was actually published here on a literary website here in South Africa. But I do want to say that our experiences may have been vastly different, but I believe that our psychological wounds are very similar, because the aftermath of the trauma that we both experienced, and that is where I think Daniel and I have found such common ground, and where all the survivors of KwaSizabantu find so much common ground. Even me with my Black friends who had it so much worse, we still find common ground because the after effects are very similar.
And I suppose that it's incredibly important to highlight that particular issue when we discuss the next part of our conversation today regarding a CRL Commission investigation that has taken place into KwaZizabantu regarding allegations of abuse and mistreatment of children and individuals within KwaZizabantu. If you can find commonalities between survivors' experiences, it would suggest that there is a pattern of abuse, that there is a system in place that generates these similar outcomes amongst individuals who have managed to escape KSB, not to mention how individuals must be existing inside of these environments, because I cannot even begin to imagine the psychological stress of permanent disassociation is all I can assume people have to do in those enclosed environments. So I don't know who would be the best person to answer this question, but what is the CRL Commission? Why is it happening? And what do we know about it so far without discussing the actual report at this point?
So the News 24 expose Exodus was very impactful. The documentary, the first episode of the podcast, and a whole bunch of articles launched on the 19th of September 2020. And it immediately caused quite an uproar in South African media. And there is a constitutional institution. Look, South Africa's constitution is in my opinion, one of the best in the world, right? And there is a constitutional institution established to strengthen our constitutional democracy, and it is called the Commission for the Promotion and Protection of the Rights of Cultural, Religious, and Linguistic Communities. They have a constitutional mandate to protect the rights of these communities. And when they actually, without any of the survivors approaching them, they, off their own bat, after all these reports came out, said that they would launch an investigation into this place. Now, they have the power to make recommendations to law enforcement, to the because they're a Chapter 9 institution, they are mandated by the Constitution. So they can't prosecute anybody, but they have the power to make recommendations, which the various governmental bodies then actually have to listen to. So for us survivors, that was a huge thing, like finally there's somebody in government, this body who is meant to protect us, who is going to listen to us. And they started their first set of hearings in October, a month after the News 24's Exodus launched. And the testimonies, many of which were televised, were the media was allowed in, was absolutely harrowing. But there's been a massive delay. I mean, we're talking October 2020, right?
Yeah.
And we are now May 2023, and there has been no official report yet. And this failure on their part, it has increased the pain and suffering of all the victims, because we thought that they would help us find justice. We thought that they would help bring about change at KwaSizabantu. And if I can just, before we carry on, just quote my one friend, Tselimpilo Malinga, who testified at the commission. She was one of the first witnesses to testify. She has a horrific story. The mission kicked her out wearing only the clothes she was wearing at the age of 16 because she accepted a chocolate from an adult man, and to them that indicated that she had a relationship. And they, because her parents were part of the mission, they excommunicated her as well. Tselimpilo is an amazing woman. And back in 2021, after a year of not hearing from the commission, because they are not good with communicating, she said that the testimony ripped open our wounds, and the commission's inaction means those wounds are still open. Nobody has dressed or bandaged them. The commission is leaving our wounds open to fester. Yeah.
Oh, that gives me chills. I guess in some ways, if we're looking at things from a kind of negative, cynical perspective, perhaps it would have been better for the commission to have never launched the investigation at all, in terms of individuals who were reconciling with experiences, recovering and healing from those, to be given a beacon of hope, which is just then left. Nothing happens with it. You are told that there's going to be action, and then you allow yourself to get your hopes up in perhaps in the hopes of your trauma being recognized, or the prevention of other vulnerable individuals being abused and traumatized, for then nothing to come of it. And I don't want to speak for people, Erika, but do you think that maybe it would have been best if this never took place to begin with, if nothing is going to happen with it?
I actually think so, yes. Because I, for one, have kind of been in a state of suspension awaiting this report. I've suspended action that I could have taken awaiting this report. And it was in January this year that one of the witnesses who testified against KwaSizabantu actually notified through a pro bono law company, an amazing company, organization, notified the commission that if they do not release the report, that they would launch a mandamus application to the court to compel the commission to release their report. The commission then replied and said that they promised to release this report by the 31st of March. On the 31st of March, the commission sent a draft report that they marked highly confidential. They sent a draft report to this organization and to KwaSizabantu for comment. And they said they wanted all the comments by the 18th of April and that they would then release the report by the 5th of May. So a few of us then saw this draft report. As far as I know, the commission didn't send it to all the witnesses that had testified. I think they only sent it to this one organization, I stand to be corrected, who had said that they would take action. So the many witnesses, so they, on the 5th of May, they didn't release the report. So this organization has now sent them a letter to say that if the report isn't released by the 26th of May, that they will launch a mandamus application at the court to compel the commission to release the report. So because this confidential draft report has been presented as confidential and is still a draft report, it's very tricky to comment on their findings. I think what I can say is that the draft contains very disappointing features that appear to indicate that the commission hasn't appreciated the severity of the evidence presented to them. And Daniel and I are going to chat a little bit about that with you. But what the report did do is give us insight into other investigations that we didn't even know had happened by other governmental bodies that we were completely unaware of. And the report sheds light on that. And because KwaSizabantu was allowed to give their evidence to the commission in camera, with absolutely nobody else present, we have no idea of what KwaSizabantu said. And the report sheds light on what KwaSizabantu testified to, and that is very interesting. So I'm not going to today comment on the findings of the report. I'm going to reserve that until they publish their final report, but I can comment on a lot of stuff.
Right. And is it your belief that if this organization didn't threaten legal action against the commission to release this report that is almost 3 years in the making, that we would still not even have a draft?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And do you believe that it's now the 7th of May, so the report wasn't made public 2 days ago on the 5th? Do you believe that it will be made public on the 26th of May? Or are we still in that space of reserving hope?
Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Just to be disappointed again?
I don't know what they're going to do, but what I can say is that by putting an application, a mandamus application in at the court, this draft report will then become a matter of public record.
Yeah, I suppose it reflects poorly on the commission if they have had to have this almost injunction put against them in order to get the report made public. It makes me personally, it makes me wonder about certain hidden agendas around this commission and why it's taken so long. I don't know typically, I don't know if either of you know typically how long these reports take and if this is an unnatural amount of time.
Oh, can I take that one, Daniel? So the commission has been involved in a lot of investigations into a lot of abusive churches in South Africa. And when I go onto their Facebook page, I see a lot of comments from people saying, when are you going to finalize your investigation into XYZ church? When are you going to finalize your investigation into XYZ church? And a Google search for an actual report that the commission has published on any of these churches came up with nothing. So I speak under correction, but I don't know that the commission has ever in its existence published a report on a problematic church.
Is there an official timeline that the commission presents to people on how long they say their reports take?
Not to my knowledge. And I would love to know how the commission are remunerated. Are they earning a monthly salary? Or do they get paid per investigation? So is it in their financial interest to keep these investigations going? I mean, I have so many questions for these people.
Daniel,
So
what?
The other, oh, sorry, I was just going to add something really quick to that. I suppose the other thing, just with the delays, I mean, in one sense, if there are legitimate reasons for why a process is taking a certain amount of time, that's okay. But I think what is inexcusable is a complete sort of radio silence in terms of people that, I mean, they probably got annoyed with me, but at one stage I was probably sending them an email every few weeks because I was just like, I'm just going to keep hounding them until I get a response. And, you know, occasionally you might get a short email back, but most of the time there just wasn't anything. So I think at the very least, you know, just as a kind of common sense thing, if there is a significant delay to proceedings like that, you know, in the interest of the psychological well-being of the people who shared their stories, all you would need to do is literally have, you know, 3 or 4 sentences on your website somewhere saying, we are working on this, or like just providing some update so there's a sign of life so that people aren't left completely in the dark, you know.
And that was about to be, you know, what I would have said as my next question. Daniel, what was your reaction to the announcement that the CRL Commission were going to be investigating KSB, and what has it been like for you as somebody that hasn't necessarily lived on the South African mission for the period of time that Erika did and still has family within that Christian mission? What's it been like for you awaiting this report from where you are in the world?
I think I've perhaps always been relatively objective about the whole process. If you talk to my friends and my family, everyone who knows me knows I'm a kind of a cynical pessimist by nature anyway. So I'm always pleasantly shocked when things turn out the way I hope in life. So
pleasantly shocked. I love that.
So yeah, just because, you know, and also after reading a lot of the stories of what happens in large religious institutions when there are allegations, particularly of sexual abuse and things like that, and just hearing over and over again that, you know, nothing's happening and, you know, long drawn out timelines and things like that, I wasn't entirely surprised. I mean, like I just said, I think it would have certainly been beneficial for them to be a little bit more forthcoming with just saying something. It's like, even if it's not the report, just providing some kind of updates on the whole thing. But overall, my reaction to the report, I mean, it's extremely disappointing and that's an understatement, really. Yeah, there's certain aspects of it that are just very confusing in terms of their response. But the one other thing I was going to add, just to sort of with what Erika was saying earlier, you know, and considering the question of like is it actually worse for the people that have spoken out and that have been ex-members of the group? And I certainly, I hear what Erika is saying, and I can certainly appreciate the psychological toll. The one silver lining, though, I think, is that the fact that these reports and these testimonies did go into the public domain is forcing KwaSizabantu to deal with something that they're not used to dealing with, namely that they're not entirely in control of the narrative anymore. You know, when you see some of the testimonies of people just breaking down in tears, recounting their experiences, I mean, only a complete idiot would look at that and say, well, I think they're lying because they're bitter. You know, there's a certain authenticity to the stories, and especially when they're starting to be corroborated by multiple sources saying the same thing without collusion. You know, it's made it such that KSB has been forced to respond to certain things publicly, whereas I think had they had their way, they would have swept everything under the carpet as much as possible. They find themselves in kind of new territory where, you know, whether it's social media or just the fact that some of the CRL testimonies were televised or live streamed, they're kind of forced to respond to it in a sense. And actually, one of the reasons why I structured my testimony in front of the CRL the way I did was sort of with a mind to saying things in a way that hopefully would actually be helpful for people that may be part of KSB, not necessarily in the leadership. I think they're kind of doing their own thing, but I'm kind of glad that the testimonies are out there, because, you know, if there is a person at KSB that's doubting or kind of wants a bit more information and is open-minded enough to engage with the other side, they're going to have all of that available to them, you know, online. And I think that can only be a good thing. The other obvious thing, of course, is that in terms of a preventative kind of measure for somebody that may hear about KSB and is thinking of visiting or joining or sending someone to their drug rehab center or something like that, to kind of, you know, if they type KwaSizabantu into Google, you don't just get their website and a few, you know, positive things. You now get this kind of plethora of News 24 articles and testimonies and CRL, you know, headlines and everything. So at the very least, I'm hoping it will give people pause, you know, who may be thinking about joining KSB or visiting KSB or something, and maybe just hopefully make them change their minds and go elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. And there's, I imagine, certain parts of the report that cannot be simply explained away or by KSB, or the kind of thought terminating cliches can't be thrown in to answer for all of the things that might come up in the report. I think it may be a bit more complex than just saying, well, that's not true because something. Well, that's not true because there's but, you know, these people are just bitter. I don't think that is going to be enough to answer for all of the information that comes out in what I imagine will be an extensive write-up, you know, not just 1 or 2 pages, but a thorough document, you would hope, after 3 years. But, you know, well, again, maybe I'm wrong.
Well, the draft report doesn't actually quote a single survivor. They quote a lot of other people, but they don't actually quote a single witness survivor. So yeah, just and can I just add, and I can say this because I have this personal experience. The commission consciously and deliberately excluded extremely important evidence, and they failed to acknowledge the fact that I have more than 70 people who sent me their personal experiences, and I have been trying to get those to the commission, and the commission has been promising me that they will let me know how to get it to them, right? No, and the failure to even acknowledge the close to 70 children who'd been abused, sexually assaulted, and marked for life is a gross irregularity. And I can say that without worrying about the confidentiality of their draft report, because I am the person who tried to get these more than 70 testimonies to the commission, and they have ignored my attempts. I have the email, I have the receipts. You know, yeah.
It is Ryan Seacrest here. There was a recent social media trend which consisted of flying on a plane with no music, no movies, no entertainment. But a better trend would be going to ChumbaCasino.com. It's like having a mini social casino in your pocket. Chumba Casino has over 100 online casino-style games, all absolutely free. It's the most fun you can have online and on a plane. So grab your free welcome bonus now at ChumbaCasino.com. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
In an environment that is enclosed from typical society, in typically like we see it in commune situations, there is an aspect of that lends itself to allowing abuse to take place behind closed doors. And I recognize and understand that can happen anywhere. It can happen in a home, in a school, in a sports club. I mean, we know that these things happen. In a place like KSB, we're not just talking about your experiences, your personal experiences under one or a number of perpetrators, because that I believe would be enough for an investigation. One person saying, this is what happened to me and I was not protected and I received no support, and in fact I was blamed for being abused as a young adult, as a child, as a vulnerable person inside this enclosed environment. I believe that is enough for an investigation. To have this many people come forward with, as Daniel said, no collusion from different parts of the world, experienced different parts of KSB, for people to come forward and have similar details that allows us to recognize a pattern of abuse that is the basis for things like coercive control, then I don't understand how that can't be recognized. Of course, this is just me sitting in my room talking from the UK, having never experienced this personally, but it's unfathomable to me that this is the place that we find ourselves in.
I think what your listeners might not know, if they haven't listened to our previous podcasts with you, is that KwaSizabantu is an extremely wealthy and therefore extremely powerful organization in South Africa. They own and run the largest bottling plant in South Africa, Akwele Water. They have a huge farming operation and major retailers sell their bottled water, of course, but also their fresh produce. And so they have, in fact, in the report, there is somebody from the government who actually says that KwaSizabantu Mission has an arsenal of legal and financial resources. Right. So just bear that in mind when we're talking about this. This isn't some small little cult, an abusive organization. This is an extremely powerful, extremely wealthy organization that has an enormous amount of money to feather people's pockets, to spend on PR campaigns, and they're spending an enormous amount of money on sports sponsorship in South Africa at the moment to get the Akwele name out there and associated with positive things. And South African sport needs sponsorship. So they are cynically they sponsor the Mid-Mile Mile, which is a big swim in a mile. And the irony is that we had to dress so modestly, and their people have to dress so modestly, and yet here are all these people running around in skimpy clothing thinking this brand is the shit. But actually, you know what, if I dressed like that, I would literally have been beaten to an inch of my life and probably kicked out. So they have an enormous amount of resources. And the thing is that most of us survivors don't, because while they were thriving, we were trying to survive. And that is not a path to growing wealth. So I can't take them to court for what they did to me because I don't have the money. But they can, they have a PR team that they've employed. And, you know, when a church has to employ a PR team, you know, there's problems. And they have a lot of money to throw around.
I imagine that the intimidation tactics that KSB leavers and former members of the mission are subjected to may be another reason why people don't want to publicly come forward using their real names, presenting themselves in court where they can be seen and further intimidated in a court of law by individuals with positions of power within KSB. Erika, you have experienced some of these intimidation tactics from your work. Is this harassment something that you are still subjected to?
To a lesser extent. I used to get a lot of horrible messages, and I even got some death threats. But KwaSizabantu has not taken me to court. And that is very telling. That's the smoking gun. Like, I have called them liars. I've called them child abusers. I've called them people who harbor sexual predators. I've called them people who protect pedophiles. I have laid it out. I'm not the only person, but I'm definitely one of the very vocal ones. And I have not been taken to court because they know that I speak the truth and that I can call on literally hundreds of witnesses to say that this happened to me and worse happened to me, you know. So they're a bunch of cowards. So they have launched a court, they have launched a defamation lawsuit against one of the other whistleblowers, but two of the leaders have launched it in their personal capacity. And it's so cowardly. I believe it's so that they can say to their retail clients, look, we are taking legal steps, you know. But why aren't they taking me to court? Why not?
Somebody come and take me to court. That's all
I'm just a girl. I'm just a girl standing in front of a cult asking them to keep their promise and take me to court.
Daniel, when you read this report, what was your initial reaction? Well, this draft report. When you read this draft report, what was your initial reaction, and what were some of the key points from that draft that you took away that we might be able to discuss in a limited capacity?
Well, I might comment on it more generally rather than specifically the report, because a lot of what's come out in the report is really just kind of symptomatic or representative of the discussions that have been taking place around all of the allegations in general. And I think one of the issues that is very problematic is that some of the language that's being used is obscuring what the real issue is. So, for example, one of the questions I was asked at the CRL hearings when I was testifying, because one of the things I spoke about was the virginity testing of young girls, and I essentially made the case that this was a violation of their bodily autonomy and that it should never have been instituted as a mission policy. And one of the commissioners asked me a question, you know, are you taking into account the fact that this is a cultural practice? Now, again, it's sort of a way of diverting away from what is actually the real issue, and that is what was the effect on the children that this occurred to. In some sense, I don't really care whether you're hiding behind culture to do something like that. Now, obviously, within a certain cultural context, there does need to be respect for it, but then what needs to be looked at is, was this actually an honoring of culture, or was it motivated by something completely different? And was there any resemblance between what they were doing and the original cultural practice? And I have it on pretty good authority that that wasn't the case at all. So these are actually the sorts of questions that need to be asked, not is virginity testing as a practice a cultural one? That does nothing for the people that experienced it, and in some cases had extremely negative long-term psychological issues to deal with as a result of that. So that's just one example. I mean, I always cringe when I hear the subject of the beatings being discussed under the term of corporal punishment, because that conjures up something much more mild and something that, yes, in a lot of countries was legal at one point, even in schools. It conjures up the images of maybe, getting the cane across the back of the hand once or twice, or, maybe like one or two relatively gentle swats or something like that. But when you're talking about the category of physical punishment, and KSB is on record publicly through their lawyer reading the report from the panel that they basically brought in which it says that the term they use to describe the beatings is vicious. Now, that's their words. That's not my words. So when you're dealing with a category of abuse that the institution themselves are forced to concede was vicious.
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW. Void were prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
That corporal punishment is no longer in the equation whatsoever. You're talking about two completely separate things. So whether it's the CRL Commission or anybody else, to phrase it in these kinds of terms that are actually downplaying the severity of some of these things, I think is extremely problematic, because it's a way of making it sound a lot more innocuous than what it actually was.
Yeah, and on that topic of corporal punishment, in 2000, KwaSizabantu came out and said there have never been any public beatings there. Then a lot of people came forward and said, oh, hello. And then they were like, yeah, there were public beatings, but it was the parents who did it. Okay, then they changed their tune again because there were so many allegations. And they were like, yes, there were excesses, but it was dealt with under church discipline. Like, I'd love to know what happened there. And then they actually handed in sworn affidavits where they vowed that corporal punishment, as they call it, I call it physical torture, what they did, was stopped in 1993, right? This they vowed. Now, in the draft report, we get yet another statement from them. The school admitted to have administered corporal punishment in the past, but stopped when the law against corporal punishment was passed in 2002. From none to none after 1993 to none after 2002. So why would we believe them now?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. In terms of witness testimony or survivor testimony that's come out of KSB, do we have any idea of what some of the most recent testimonies have been released, or that you've at least seen, Erika, in terms of allowing us to know or understand what the environment still consists of after you personally have left?
Yeah, so the thing with leaving a place like that is it often takes you a few years to even get to the point of understanding what happened to you. But I have spoken to people who have left in the past 2 years. And according to them, parents are still beating their children. Now, under South African law, this is now illegal. There is no such thing as legal corporal punishment in South Africa anymore, not in school and not in the home. As a parent, you are not allowed to hit your child. Now, these survivors allege that this is still happening. And you know what? I believe them, because they believe that you have to break the spirit of a child by the age of 3. Yes. And they preach this, and they're still preaching it, except they've changed their wording a little bit. The latest wording a few weeks ago was you have to bend the spirit of a child. They've changed their wording because they know what it sounds like to say you have to break the spirit of a child. Now it's bend the spirit of a child, but they still believe this. So in terms of people who have recently left, there are people who are willing to speak. And there were actually a number of people who were willing to speak to the CRL Rights Commission. To my knowledge, they did not interview those people. People who left around 2019, which is a hell of a lot more recent than me or Daniel. But so there are people who have left recently who are willing to speak, but they are still like in the throes of the trauma, so I feel very protective towards them as well.
Yeah, sorry, Casey, I might just add to that. One of the challenges when you're dealing with investigations into high control religious groups in general is the whole question of coercive control, because the problem is that with these kinds of groups, they don't have to force people to do things, like in the sense that they're physically making them do something. So, for example, let's take something like the idea that a lot of KSB members voluntarily confess their sins to the leaders. Well, they've been indoctrinated into a religious belief system where they fear eternal damnation if they don't do that. You don't need to physically compel somebody to do anything at that point. Or let's take the idea that if you leave KwaSizabantu, you're destined for eternal damnation as well. You don't need to lock the gates at that point. People aren't going to leave because the ideology is doing the heavy lifting in that sense. But the problem with that is that can't be prosecuted and it can't even really be investigated, because if you have someone saying, no, I'm doing this voluntarily, even if you can sort of sit down and try to show them that while they may think they're doing it voluntarily, they've been essentially brainwashed into this. Unless they, as an adult, say, no, this is being done against my will, there's really nothing you can do about it. And this is where I think it's a positive development that there seems to be a lot more recognition surrounding coercive control now with these kinds of groups. And there is more awareness happening. But there is a sense in which, like with people saying, well, it constitutes religious freedom if they want to practice some of these bizarre religious practices. And in a sense, there's some truth to that. I mean, you can't come in there and force them to start dating each other before they get married, for example. if they want to get married to strangers, that's their prerogative. But the problem is then the question of, say, a child that's grown up, that's all they've ever known, and they've been kind of coerced in the sense that they've been taught that any other way is sinful and results in God's judgment. Then you've got the psychological element, which is a lot more difficult to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this draft report shows a complete lack of understanding of coercive control. Complete.
Which is kind of strange, because I feel like if there are people employed to generate these investigations or participate in these investigations, then there should be continuous and ongoing training in certain fields of exploitation and abuse, which of course is now widely recognized as including things such as coercive control or indoctrination, or any number of different words that people choose to use around the psychological captivity and kidnapping of people's psychological functions. But the thing that is interesting about what you've said there, Daniel, is that in the UK, we do recognize coercive control as a criminal offence in intimate partnerships and family environments, so not extended to groups at this point. But what comes with that is the Crown Prosecution Service putting in documents around warning signs and recognizing coercive control and what methods look like when a person is trying to psychologically control you, as opposed to physically or sexually or financially, which of course is encompassed in the psychological control of an individual. And I feel like even if coercive control isn't something that is punishable by law, we can at least bring in things that allow people to understand what it looks like. And then if it is punishable by law and it's mandated that those documents and resources and training of staff around law enforcement has to exist, then of course there's an opportunity for people to say, to individuals who say, oh no, but I'm choosing to do this. You can present that person with a list of recognized research and resources and say, well, this is what our government says coercive control looks like. If any of these things apply to you, there is a chance that you haven't done these things voluntarily. So I feel like we have a long way to go, even in this country. But imagine the difference it would make if even that was talked about or considered in South Africa, where I know that human rights and equal rights are completely different than in other parts of at least colonialized societies and the Commonwealth countries around the world. And that's a whole other conversation.
You know what the problem is, though, and I agree with you completely, but you know what the issue with it is that the kinds of groups that are likely to be using coercive control are also typically the types of groups that are going to be extremely suspicious of the government by and large. So it's actually, I sort of have mixed feelings about this, because there's a part of me that wants to say, look, let's just make this illegal so we can prosecute people. But it's not actually going to solve the problem, because people that have been indoctrinated, the only way you're going to get them free of that is by actually changing their minds.
Yeah.
In a sense, voluntarily.
What can I say? I just think that we can. I'm like, yeah, let's just do these things. It's so easy to do these things and it will solve everything, which of course is not the case. Part of me has to believe that, though. Otherwise, I don't know how we can continue to exist.
You know, one of the things that this report has shown us, which we were unaware of, is that there were, like I said, investigations from various departments. The report says that the Department of Health team found that responses by interviewees sounded rehearsed. Okay. It was further discovered that children that were born in KwaSizabantu were never immunized, i.e. girls had not been given the HPV vaccine, as school health nurses are not allowed into the mission. Now, these are all red flags, right? It was discovered when they were interviewing employees to find out about unfair labor practices, that employees were unwilling to talk to them because of fear of being victimized. I mean, if that isn't the biggest red flag, like, you know, yeah. So we await the final report, because I have a feeling the fact that we didn't, because we actually said we're not going to comment on a draft report. My feeling was that I'm not going to do the commission's work for it. I'm not going to point out all the problematic things in this draft report for them to fix. I want them to publish what they think, and then we can tackle them in the court of public opinion and in the courts, in the actual courts, and ask for a judicial review, you know, and all those things. So that's why it's also important that we don't talk too much about the details of what they say, because it gives them the opportunity to mask the seriously problematic things. But the red flags and they just mention these things without analyzing it. Like, I see the responses by the interviewees sounded rehearsed. Now, when the Department of Health finds that in their investigation, surely that goes, hello, coercive control.
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
So our hopes for the report when it's made public, are we hoping for major changes from the draft to the final report, or are we expecting to be disappointed? And I mean, realistically, what do we expect? And idealistically, what would we like?
Well, if I can give my opinion, and that is that there has been political pressure on the CRL Rights Commission, and that they have caved to it. that is my personal opinion. We've got a minister in our cabinet who was premier of the province, Sihle Zikalala, and I'm happy to call him out in public because he is a staunch supporter of KwaSizabantu. He's now a minister in our cabinet, a friend of KwaSizabantu. So I would love there to be a commission of inquiry into what political pressure was brought to bear upon these commissioners, and how did they cave, and why did they cave? That's my personal opinion. Yeah.
Well, Daniel, you said that individuals in KSB are likely to be wary of government figures. And in my mind, I'm thinking there's probably some overlap between authority figures in KSB and in government, considering the power and wealth that you mentioned, Erika, KSB having and harnessing throughout South Africa and beyond. So that is something that I thought about when that point was made as well. But Daniel, what are you hoping or expecting when this report is made public?
Look, I don't have high hopes that there's going to be anything massively meaningful. I mean, I really hope I'm wrong, and this is just my cynical nature speaking. But I've heard a couple of people sort of say, I think it was even Koos in his testimony talking about, the government needs to get involved and start, exercising a little bit more of their authority over a religious institution like them. And I don't know enough about South Africa to know how realistic that actually is. I have a feeling that what's more realistic is that there's going to continue to be kind of an exodus from KSB in terms of people leaving, like the more the problems come out. But I think there will also always be a relatively sizable group that just remains loyal to them no matter what, because typically that's the case in high control groups. We've seen groups where, the leaders have been sent to jail for heinous crimes in the past, and the group stands by them and in fact just says they're being persecuted for their faith. So it is just kind of a funny quirk about human psychology that some people seem to struggle to, recognize certain things even when the evidence seems to be very plain, and act accordingly. So I think, and there's also, you have to understand, there's also people that they've invested their entire lives into KSB, religiously, socially, economically, everything. So of course it's an incredibly frightening prospect for them to leave, and therein lies the problem, So yeah, I don't really know what the final outcome will be. I think some of it is also going to depend on factors that I don't have anything to do with, namely some of the legal people that are getting involved now. And I think, Erika can fill you in on more of this, but kind of appealing to the government as well to at least look into what's been going on. And because I'm outside of South Africa, I can't really comment on that in any kind of detail.
Yeah, we're very lucky to have a retired judge who has looked at all this and gone, hang on. And so he is helping a few of us with really good legal advice. But again, our hands are tied, or our mouths are silenced until the final report is actually published. Or we launch this application to the court to compel them, and then the draft report becomes is going to be on the public record, or in the public record, and then we can say, yeah, look at this.
Well, you're both involved in various activism work around highlighting the continued abuses and wrongdoings of KwaZizabantu, and some of that includes going to academic events and sharing your knowledge and expertise with the rest of the world in terms of cult education and prevention, which leads us nicely into talking about the International Cultic Studies Association and their annual conference, which is taking place at the end of June into early July. And you will both be together presenting a panel So I'm going to allow you to both just talk us through what we can expect from that, and what day and time your panel is taking place.
Yeah, so we're just in the process of finalizing that. In like this week it needs to be done. And so the presentation is really going to be focusing on a number of different things. We're going to be talking about childhood trauma at KSB, and we're going to be looking at some of the long-term psychological effects of that. So what are some of the ways that this affects people in adulthood, even after they've left KSB? And then we're also just going to be discussing the process of the investigations, and just some of the different features in that, some of the different news outlets that covered the story, and also just some of the responses from KSB, either through their YouTube channel or things they've engaged with us on social media. So that's kind of the gist of it. And we're working very hard to try and get it done in time.
Pursuing Justice in the Time of COVID, KwaSizabantu is a case study that Daniel and I are presenting, is on the 29th of June, at their time, 4:30 to 6 p.m.
And you'll be presenting together, which I think is really great, because I've always said this. What I love about the dynamic between the two of you is that, Daniel, you're very academic and very nuanced with how you talk about things, and very clinical. And Erika, you're very emotive, you're very empathetic, and we get the raw emotional side of your personal experiences, but also how other people's experiences affect you outwardly as well. That's not to say that Daniel's not affected by people's stories, but I think the outward expression of that emotion is very different. So we get to cover all the bases of really looking at things objectively and emotionally. And I think that that's really important when we're talking about things like KwaSizabantu, because we have to be able to kind of almost decompartmentalize and talk about things objectively, to understand how the system exists and how it's changed, and the cultural influences and the historical influences. But then we also need the emotional side of things to understand how those systems affect individuals on a personal level, and how they continue to affect people to this day, which is why this commission report is so important, and why it's so frustrating that there are hundreds of people awaiting the results of this promised report. And it's been almost 3 years, and without the threat of legal action, we probably still wouldn't even have a draft, which people who wanted to testify about their abusive personal experiences haven't even most likely been able to see, let alone have their passages included within the report. So, again, my soapbox and my idealistic, why can't the world just be this way, is a place I find myself in often. But I think it's important to do that from time to time, because otherwise, when you're talking about the power and wealth of KwaSizabantu, where you're talking about the separation and weaponizing of family members against one another, and shunning practices and excommunication, when you're talking about government perhaps having sway or influence over the reports becoming finalized and released into the public, or some of the reports perhaps being redacted or brushed to the side, maybe that's not happening, but there's a potential that it could be. When you talk about all of these things, people testifying about their horrific experiences and making themselves vulnerable, and nothing happens with any of that.
Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
it can make you feel defeated. It can make you feel like all of this work is for nothing. It can make you feel like your experiences don't need to be validated, that you will never receive any type of compensation or recognition for what happened to you. And when I do this work consistently and I hear these really difficult, harrowing stories, and I read these really powerful books that people have written about their firsthand experiences, and I do daily cult news segments on all of these horrible things that are happening in the world, I think, where is the good in people? And I would like to offer you both the opportunity to kind of round up our discussion today with talking about why it's important that we continue to do this, and why you're still fighting for the report to be released, and why you're still hoping that the right changes might be made, because otherwise, what's the point? Why are we here?
I'll go first, Daniel. This is actually something I discussed in my session with my therapist yesterday. Since the reading the draft report, it shattered me emotionally. I mean, I cried for 4 days. I wasn't really able to work for like almost 2 weeks. Like it paralyzed me. And that's when I realized that I've kind of suspended my life hoping for a positive outcome for survivors from this report. And I realized that I felt like a failure for the report not reflecting what I had hoped it would do, and that I took that failure on myself as my failure. And in therapy yesterday, my therapist really helped me see that I need to acknowledge the progress that we've made, and that progress might come in the form of small cracks that let the light in. And that I cannot rely on an external source, this report, to validate what I've done and what we've done. And we'll never know how many people have not joined KwaSizabantu, like Daniel mentioned, because of what we've done. In December, I met with a young guy, and I think he's around 20, 21, and he left KwaSizabantu about 2 years ago. And he said to me, he thanked me for the work that we've done, because he said it has made their lives easier. In fact, he said that it made their lives easier at KwaSizabantu already. So I think KwaSizabantu has already implemented changes in the past 2 decades because of the work that we've done. And it might not feel like it's enough, but it is actually already a lot. And then he also said that the work that we're doing now has made his journey since leaving KwaSizabantu so much easier. And so I need to focus on that and not expect the authorities to, validate
the right thing.
To do the right thing. I think I've given up hope on South African authorities. I'll keep on fighting. And the reason I'm fighting is because there are children being born and being raised at KwaSizabantu today. And if not me, then who?
Yeah, I completely agree. And firstly, I mean, the other thing is, I don't know if there's anybody at this stage that's done more than Erika. When you just think about, I mean, this is going back. When was it that you started writing articles? I think it was the early 2000s, wasn't it? And then, of course, being
2000.
Yeah, and then
almost
being
my
involved
whole
in the
life,
documentary.
just almost my whole life. That's it. That's all it is.
Right. Yeah. So just, I mean, I suppose that's certainly important to highlight. I mean, and I think you're absolutely right. The difficulty is that a lot of the positive impacts that are made are things that we aren't going to get feedback on necessarily, because they're happening in people's minds, and of course, with a place like KwaSizabantu being as insular as it is, they're not necessarily going to have the chance to reach out. I mean, I've had someone just in the last few weeks that they've left KwaSizabantu relatively recently as well, and was telling me that she'd listened to the interview that I did with you, Casey, whenever it was, a year ago or so. And, was just like really found certain aspects of it really encouraging. And even just in the sense of kind of a feeling of solidarity. I remember reading your book, Erika, as well. And one of I think the most emotional parts of it was just your story of the fruit salad, and
Yeah.
I think things like that, even though they're in the large scheme of things, it's a relatively small event, it really resonates with people. And it does help to kind of, I think, steer them in the right direction, and just to at least feel like, okay, I'm not the one that's kind of going crazy, and like I'm not the only one feeling all of these things after leaving. Clearly, there's a large number of people that have gone through something similar and are feeling similar things. And of course, to make matters worse, not only is there the absence of kind of the positive feedback, but then you're constantly dealing with an organization that just simply will not tolerate criticism. And so, you're getting these public, I've lost count of how many times they've gone on about, I assume they're talking about me because it's things relating to the confession and stuff, and just, and the language they're invoking is so typically cultic, where, we're being led by Satan and all of these things. And I still think if I was working for Satan, I should be a lot richer than I am. But that aside, and that was the other thing I was going to say too, just in terms of the negative feedback that you get from the group themselves. They're kind of telling on themselves when they respond to allegations in this way. It's an absolute disgrace to me. And, I've been involved with a number of different churches now in my life. But what is disgraceful to me is that, churches still have this reputation that when, credible allegations of abuse are made, they have this reputation of sweeping them under the rug and then attacking the victims. For organizations that are meant to be representing, all that is kind of about loving your neighbor as yourself, that's horrendous. And to anyone that's at KSB or that's like looking at the story from the outside, just go and look at the way KSB's leadership have responded, and ask yourself if there's been any compassion, has there been any humility, has there been the tiniest shred of remorse for the things that they've conceded took place there. And then ask yourself what that tells you about the leadership that's been in charge of that place for decades. And that'll give you a pretty good indication of where the truth lies.
It is interesting to me that every time one of you makes a public statement about KwaSizabantu, there typically seems to be a session from the pulpit that is found online that has religious justification and righteous damnation of apostates that are speaking against KwaSizabantu and their religious mission. And again, like as you said, Daniel, it just tells you everything that you need to know. If and they can't help themselves, they could just not comment. They could just not comment, which would, maybe you wouldn't even know if they were watching you then. Maybe you wouldn't even know if they were hearing your messages, your pleas of like, please, let's change things. Let's prevent this from happening in the future. Let's do better. Maybe you wouldn't even know if you were shouting into the void, but they give you this confirmation in these very angry sermons, and I think that's just giving you more power, isn't it? Because they just can't help themselves. And it's every now and then I get a video from you, Daniel, saying, oh, you might find this sermon quite interesting, and it's a response about most likely about you, about a tweet that you'd put out the day before. And I know that it is not funny in the grand scheme of things, but there is part of me that finds that just really quite humorous that they can't help themselves.
And hopefully when Hulu makes a documentary about us, or turns my book into a series or something, that these like humorous things will come through, because I think that is also really important, because we do laugh actually quite a lot about their buffoonery. They basically like little Trumps standing on the pulpit shouting with orange faces.
Right. And it is also just, I think, telling in the sense that you can tell this is a group of people that have been used to having things their own way in terms of controlling the narrative about them publicly. In the age of media and social media, that's no longer possible. And I think that's intensely frustrating to them, that they like, because I mean, my goodness, the amount of sermons they preached about people gossiping and, what are you saying about others? It must be absolutely infuriating to them that people leave and then don't abide by their rules anymore because they realize they're complete nonsense. They just can't, they just don't understand that at all. And it's about control, But the only other thing that I wonder, because the leadership has so much access to what people are thinking because of the confessional system.
Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
There's a part of me that, and this is just pure speculation on my part, but there's a part of me that wonders if there's actually members of the commission that are reading some of these things and then feeling guilty about it and confessing it to the leadership, or even like saying, hey, I heard somebody say this, like, and they were saying that this is unbiblical, what we're doing, like, why are we doing this? I just wonder whether these kinds of conversations are happening, and that might be part of what's motivating them to preach in the way that they are, because there may be some sense in which they're concerned about that they're losing control of the behavior.
Oh gosh, I could just imagine people hearing Erika and Daniel and just getting so mad at people being like, oh, stop saying their names. Like, it's not just the outside, you're infiltrating the inside as well. And again, that's a thought that just brings me, like a bit of entertainment. Again, there is the other side of that to consider, that the consequences of people accessing that stuff, immediate consequence of that might be the punishments that they endure, but the eventual outcome of that might be people saying, yeah, no, other people have left and I know that I can do the same, so I am actually just going to go now, and deal with the consequences of shunning and excommunication after the fact. So there are essays that you've written, there are award-winning memoirs that you've written, there are News 24 exposés, so many articles from News 24 that people can access and read. There's the Exodus expose and podcast series. There's conversations that we've had on this show. There's other panels and talks that Erika, you've done. You just, I just watched you the other day in video clips, like on the big TV. And it's not stopping. You have your ICSA panel coming up at the end of June. I know, Erika, that you're still writing, not necessarily about KSB, but, you're still writing, and any traffic that we generate around your names is going to lead people back to this information that you've both put out in online spaces for people to access. So despite the commission's complete lack of care, responsibility, accountability for being just disorganized or manipulated or whatever has happened in this process, there are still people like yourselves that are fighting for justice, that are fighting for truth. And I don't see either of you slowing down. Do you have plans outside of the ICSA conference on what you're going to continue doing in terms of highlighting the wrongdoings of KSB?
I think we'll just keep doing what we're doing. Daniel is absolutely brilliant at taking their current sermons, which they use YouTube to proselytize on, and pointing out seriously problematic things. I am good at just highlighting the egregious trauma that people are experiencing. I'm hoping to find an international publisher for my memoir. At the moment, it's available on Audible and on Kindle, but I would love for there to be an actual publisher. So we'll see. I would love for my memoir to be turned into a media that is consumed by more people, which is on a streaming service, for example. I would love that to happen. I don't know right now how to make it happen, but I don't know, maybe one of your listeners will have an idea or two.
And since the beginning of both of your journeys in speaking out about KSB, there's been momentum pretty much consistently, and a an interest from various different platforms to expose this information that both of you have, that others have come forward with. So I don't know if the train will slow down. And I think, again, it's important to remember those things. Daniel, do you have any more essays that you plan to write, or any other work that you plan to do around highlighting KSB's abuses?
Not immediately. I've sort of been trying to distance myself, and Erika keeps asking me to do things. So. No, it's kind of funny because I never really consciously planned to get involved in the whole process of, like, really, especially with the
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
The CRL and everything. I kind of assumed, because I was outside of the country, that my voice would not be a necessary inclusion, shall we say. So it's almost been more of an accidental thing where one thing has led to another. The only thing I was a little bit more proactive with, I suppose, was after Erika and the two of us spoke together on Sarah Steele's Let's Talk About Sex. I kind of sought out a couple of other podcasts, which is when I found you, Casey, just through a Google search. But yeah, it's hard, isn't it? Because there is a certain psychological toll that it takes when you're constantly dealing with, just all of these things. And I'm relatively good at compartmentalizing in that respect, but like even just the sermons that they preach, they're just awful things to listen to. I don't know how people do it every week, but yeah, so it's sort of it's a balancing act, isn't it, of being like responsible in terms of mental health and all of those psychological factors, but also recognizing that there is kind of this unique situation at the moment and this window we've been given where we do have a platform, and I don't want to take that for granted in the sense that, obviously, if something's going to be done, it needs to be done now, just because of everything that's already occurred with the investigations and the media and everything. Like, this is the best chance we have, I think. So yeah, we'll see what happens in the future. I think at this stage we're just kind of focused mostly on the conference that's coming up, and then we'll see what happens after that.
I'm excited. I'm excited for all of it. I'm excited to see where both of you will be in a year from now. I can't believe it's only been a year. I looked at the episode dates, and my episode with you, Daniel, came out on March the 18th last year. And my interview with you, Erika, came out June the 3rd last year. I feel like I've known you my whole life.
That's insane.
I would like I'd like a little bit of credit for your friendship.
Yes, you're like Cupid. You have a little nappy on. You've got your little bow and arrow. You've got your little golden crown, and you've put me and Erika together. And I am truly so thankful for some of the genuine friendships that I have found through doing this work, and my connection with Erika is something that I am really thankful for and don't take for granted, because sometimes we just shoot the shit, and you need to do that in this space. It's so important to do that, and I feel like you're a great support for me, Erika. And of course, our conversation keeps getting the podcast shortlisted for different podcast awards, which is so exciting. It's wonderful, and hopefully we will bring some of those awards home to further validate every guest that's ever been on the show and shared their stories. And I'm thankful that both of you continue to work with me, and to continue furthering my own education and the education of the listeners. And to anybody that might be leaving a high demand religious group, or specifically KSB, that comes across these conversations and knows that there are safe places for them to come to, even if those spaces are virtual, where they can get support, understanding, validation, and know that they are not alone in this journey, as you two may have been at the time you left. It's almost like saying, what would I have really benefited from when I left? How can I provide that for people that are now leaving? And I think that there's something so special in that. This is where we see people born and raised and in cults and religious groups being able to offer those spaces and services for people that perhaps they didn't have access to when they left. So thank you both so much for your continued work. I know it's exhausting, but you have to just keep going on because we need you to do it. And like you said, Erika, if not you, then who?
Yeah, well, Casey, I did want to say a very big thank you because, I mean, when I contacted you initially, I sort of thought it would be the usual thing of, maybe she'll want to do an interview and then that'll kind of be it. And here we are, a year and a half, I think, later, or a year and a bit later, and you've interviewed both of us. I know you've had Erika on live streams in the past, and you've certainly gone well and truly above and beyond what I was expecting. And it's just, it's amazing to have people that are willing to give us a platform.
Absolutely. I echo that, Casey, and the shortlisting on the awards that you're up for just goes to show that you're doing an amazing job. And my friendship with both of you mean so much to me. Daniel, I know you say it was kind of like almost accidental, but honestly, I don't think I would still be going if it weren't for your support, your personal support. Honestly, and Casey, just like sometimes just shooting the breeze on WhatsApp is also so much fun. Just sharing coronation memes.
Oh gosh, don't get me started on the coronation. Oh gosh, I don't want to get too personally opinionated on this podcast, but I just absolutely could not care less about the king, which might upset a few people listening. But there are bigger things that we need to focus on in this country than the coronation of the king. Anyway, Erika, please can you tell the listeners where they can find your book and any of your other work that they might be interested in reading about, because you do write, that's what you do.
Yeah, but I mean, my writing is usually for magazines who commission me to do a piece, or so I would say my book Mission of Malice, which in South Africa, please go and buy it at an indie bookstore. But unfortunately, internationally, you're going to probably have to go to Amazon. And it is on Kindle, and it is also on Audible. But I also encourage you to read what Daniel's written. And he hasn't only written those 4 essays. There's another essay that was also very impactful a little bit later. And Daniel, I hope that you will continue writing them. And I'm really looking forward when the final report is released to see what Daniel has to say about it, because I just know it's going to be so insightful and incisive.
Yeah. Daniel, you mentioned when we first spoke that your essays are available on KSB Alert, which is a website that is still in existence. Is there anywhere else people might be able to track down your writing?
I published them originally just on WordPress. It's a site just called Revival Reviewed. If you'd have to Google it. I can't give the complete link just off the top of my head, but it's something under that if you type it in with my name. There's a lot of with KSB Alert as well. There's been sort of a flurry of articles and stuff that have obviously kind of been accompanying all of the stuff that's coming out of the media. So it's definitely worth checking that out, just because there's a lot of resources on there now that are really excellent and just covering different aspects of KSB, and just it's really worth checking out.
Well, I'll be sure to put some links in the episode description to the things that we've talked about today. And when this episode is released, perhaps I can ask both of you to record a comment or two that we might put at the end of this regarding your thoughts and feelings around the official, publicly released version of the CRL Commission report, which is hopefully going to be out by the end of May, but we're not going to hold our breath because who knows what might happen if we do that. So that leads us to the end of our discussion today. Thank you both so much for your time. I appreciate both of you so much. And I'm really looking forward to seeing where we are in a year from now. Perhaps we'll have another one of these discussions, and who knows what we might be talking about at that time. So thank you both so much. And I hope that you enjoy the rest of your days.
Thanks so much, Casey.
Thanks,
Daniel.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
So, just an update on the 29th of June. As we thought when we recorded this episode a few weeks ago, the CRL Rights Commission did not release their final report as they promised on the 31st of May. And 2 days ago, they were served with a notice, and I'm one of the applicants, that there has been an application, a mandamus application is what they call it, in the Johannesburg High Court. They now have 10 working days to consider whether they wish to oppose the application or not. The application is to compel them to release their report. If they wish to oppose the application, they have to file a formal notice with the court. They've then got 3 weeks to file an answering affidavit in response to our affidavits. And then after that, we can obtain a hearing date from the court. So we'll see whether they oppose our application or whether they release the final report. It's all going to be happening in the next month. And yeah, so here's hoping.
It is Ryan Seacrest here. There was a recent social media trend which consisted of flying on a plane with no music, no movies, no entertainment. But a better trend would be going to ChumbaCasino.com. It's like having a mini social casino in your pocket. Chumba Casino has over 100 online casino-style games, all absolutely free. It's the most fun you can have online and on a plane. So grab your free welcome bonus now at ChumbaCasino.com. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.